Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to our Waste Panel for Sustainability Week. I just wanted to thank you all for joining us and to warn everybody in advance that I am getting over a bit of a flu, and so I will keep my questions brief in order to allow our panelists here to shine. Without further ado, I just want to allow each of them to introduce themselves. So Janet, Tato, and Susan, would you all turn on your videos? And one by one, could you just tell our group here a little bit about yourselves and the work that you do?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Janet Dominitz. I am the director of MassPIRG, the Public Interest Research Group. We're a statewide nonprofit organization, and I run our zero waste program there.
I guess I'll go next. Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Collins. I am the president of the Container Recycling Institute. We're located in the Los Angeles area, but we do advocacy work around packaging, recycling all over the United States. And I'll turn it over to Tato.
Hi, I'm Jack. Everybody calls me Tato, Biggio. I'm a co-founder and co-CEO of UBQ Materials, a company that has developed a breakthrough technology that enables us to convert mixed municipal streams of waste that typically go to landfill or incineration into a novel thermoplastic material that can replace conventional plastics. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you guys all so much. I'm going to jump right into a few of my questions, but I do want to remind our audience, please be asking questions. We keep an eye on them, and I'm going to turn really as soon as possible to the amazing questions that I'm sure that you all have. But to start it off, a question that I will pose first to Janet, but I would love for everybody to weigh in, is just sort of a fundamental question about our waste. I think for a lot of people, you throw your garbage in the trash, you take your trash out once a week, and that kind of ends your relationship with it. But that trash has a life of its own. And so, Janet, could you talk a little bit about, where our waste goes, and relatedly, where should it be going?
Thanks, Ivy. So my perspective is Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, we dispose of approximately 6 million tons of waste every year. And the vast majority of that is going to landfills and incinerators. And in order to be brief, I will say this: there is nothing good about a landfill or an incinerator. And if our waste isn't going there, some of it's becoming litter. So it's all bad news. The good news is the vast majority of what gets disposed actually could be either reduced, reused, or recycled, well over 80%, according to the EPA. And so our work is focused on, reduce first. And we used to say zero waste, and people would think that sounds, like a lovely dream and vision, but actually zero waste is internationally recognized public policy that's being put into place in cities, states, and countries around the world. So right now, the answer is, when we say we're throwing away, there is no away. This stuff is going to pollute via landfills, incinerators are becoming litter. We know how to reduce it, and that's why we're here. So that's my answer. Thanks, Ivy.
Of course. Tato, would you want to jump in next?
Yeah, of course. First of all, that's exactly what needs to be done. And congratulations for developing an ambitious objective. I think that, as you will say, we call the trash because we had a pizza box with our pizza. We're very happy with it. We throw it in a bag, and all of a sudden that becomes a very easy to think, a bad thing, smelly, that becomes trash. And that's not the case. These are valuable materials that entail a lot of energy, efforts, transportation to create. And as was well said, landfills and incinerators are terrible solutions. These are not solutions. And they create enormous hazards to the environment. Landfills create methane and underwater leachates, an impact to the biodiversity. incinerators create dioxins, furans, and flying ashes from these high temperatures. So 100% we need to reduce, first of all, then we need to reuse, and then we need to recycle, and whatever is left should not go by any chance to landfill or incineration. And this is exactly the place where UBQ is sitting, because we're going to be taking all that residual materials, mixed and recyclable, that instead of being disposed to landfill or incineration, can be returned back in a reusable way to the economy as a substitute for oil-based plastics that are expensive, scarce, and very high carbon intensive. So just to wrap it up, we're going to be using that residual waste, that 20%, hopefully, in order to create a material that can replace carbon intense alternatives, and bring back into the economy a precious new natural resource that never existed before, which is called UBQ.
Susan, do you want to weigh in on this as well? Where should our waste be going?
Well, I think a lot of it has already been covered, but I will say that add to this that it's an even bigger situation and really on the edge of a crisis in Massachusetts, more so than other states, because the state has diminishing landfill capacity. Currently, about half of the waste that's disposed in the state has to go out of state for disposal already. And as a result of supply and demand, Massachusetts has the highest landfill tipping fees in all of the US, out of all 50 states. So that creates an opportunity. That creates an opportunity to do other things other than disposal, both for the environment and because economically it makes sense. Because everybody in Massachusetts right now is paying more than anybody else to dispose of their waste. So the opportunities are for the programs that don't send things to landfills and incinerators. Janet already named these. I'll just go through the list again. Obviously, the thing that I work on the most is expansion of the state's bottle bill. And I will say that one of the reasons that that particular program is so important is that of all the material types in the waste stream, aluminum on a pound for pound basis is the #1 material type that we can get the most energy savings and most greenhouse gas savings out of recycling it. And so if there's any material that you want to go straight to that material and make sure you're getting darn near 100% of it, it's aluminum. It's literally like pound for pound, about 10 times more powerful on an energy and greenhouse gas basis than the other material types. So expanding the bottle bill is critically important, but then more composting programs are needed. Of course, reduction is needed. And EPR programs, extended producer responsibility for all types of materials. Massachusetts is not at the forefront. Countries in Europe, other states, provinces in Canada are already doing all of these things. So they're proven successful models, and Massachusetts needs to start checking all those boxes and doing all of those programs in Massachusetts.
Absolutely. And I actually want to insert a question from the audience here just because it's so relevant. We had somebody ask where are we at with the Massachusetts bottle bill. They were asking, does it need to be updated? What would it look like to update it? Is that something that you could weigh in on? And Janet, you as well?
Yes, definitely. It does need to be updated. It's not only performing lower than any of the other bottle bills in the US, it's literally the poorest performing bottle bill in the world right now. The redemption rate is only 38%, and internationally, bottle bills have an average redemption rate of 80%. So it's fallen far behind, but it can be fixed. Programs nearby have been expanded and have been modernized with great success. So, Maine is a fully expanded bill, and it has double the performance of the Massachusetts bill. New York is at 70%. They're looking at going to expansion, and Connecticut just did go to expansion in the last year and did increase its deposit from 5 cents to 10 cents. So those are some models where there's more success, and absolutely Massachusetts should move forward with that ASAP.
Anything to add to that, Jan?
Yeah, I mean, it is just common sense and it's win-win-win. It would be good to reduce the waste that we generate. It absolutely is proven study after study to reduce litter. As Susan mentioned, the cost of picking up containers as trash is, is serious for cities and towns. So there's really no downside. We just got to do it.
Absolutely. I want to turn now to talk a little bit about food waste. I think that is sort of one of the more visible kinds of trash, so to speak, that we generate. I know here in Boston, we have sort of our nascent composting program that I'm starting to see, like even my neighbors have it out on the street. But is composting our best option? Are there other options? Is that something that we should look to see more widespread? What are our options here when we talk about food waste? Tato, do you want to start us off?
I think that I would leave it maybe to Janet to talk a little about the policy of composting, because definitely that's the right thing to do with organic matter, as long as it can be composted. If organic matter is of course contaminated and has problems, then we can come into play. But I think that the merit should go to composting as much as we can, and I will leave it to Janet maybe to answer.
Yeah, so there's two jumping off points here. One is almost 40% of the food that is produced in this country is thrown away. I mean, it is a sin, and I mean that in a pan-religious way. We should not be throwing away the amount of food that we are. And then it's a double whammy, because food that goes to landfills, the EPA estimates that landfills are the third largest source of human-caused methane in the United States. So we're creating, this is Sustainability Week. We're talking about climate. This is making climate change worse. So we really need to, you have revolutionize in the title of this panel. We need to revolutionize the way that we deal with food in this country. And I'm just going to break it into two categories. One is, of course, people should eat, fruits and vegetables, and there will be food scraps. And we need the infrastructure to divert those from landfills and incinerators and do the composting, whether it's backyard or larger scale. And then there's wasted food, perfectly good food that gets tossed. And we need to update our labeling, and we need better food rescue. And so those are two different categories, but they're all under this, one umbrella of the amount of food that we waste in this country. It really is a sin. I can't think of any other word. And so we have a lot of work to do there. But again, it's not, we don't have to invent anything. We know exactly what to do. We just need to turn the ship around.
I wanted to ask too, we had a question come in about our local statistics. Is there a sense of where Massachusetts compares to the rest of the country in terms of what we do with our food waste, how much we're composting, things like that?
We have taken some baby steps. Maybe I'll say toddler steps. We have, so about 8 or 9 years ago, the Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP in Massachusetts, banned large producers from disposing of food. So basically, if you generated more than 1 ton of food waste a week, you had to find another endpoint for it. You couldn't throw it away. And then 2 years ago, the 1 ton got reduced to a 0.5 ton. So we're making steps, but we really need to get to 0. We really need all food waste diverted from disposal. Where we're at compared to the rest of the country, I believe Vermont is ahead of us, just to think about New England. I believe Maine is ahead of us. We're probably ahead of Rhode Island, Connecticut. But anyway, the point, as Susan said earlier, we should be number 1. What do we have all these resources and universities and, industrious thinkers for it, we need to be number one, and we're nowhere near it in diverting food waste and composting.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really well said. The next thing I wanted to pivot to talk about, and then I'm going to sort of turn to our audience questions here. So thank you guys for those who have submitted, and please continue to submit. Is this sort of push-pull, I'll call it, between the role that we play as individuals and then the role that like corporations and industries and all of these things have. And the question that I wanted to ask you guys is where you see the sort of corporation level obligation to be a part of the solution. I mean, we have here amongst our audience what I assume are a lot of very engaged individuals who, want to buy EVs and want to compost and want to do all of these things. But looking at a bigger scale, like what is the obligation of corporations and sort of where do they need to step up? Oh, and Susan, if you could start with that one, and then we'll go.
Sure. So for the most part, these solutions that we're talking about are not going to happen on an individual level. It's not going to be one household, making their household zero waste as much as they can. It has to be absolutely systemic, the whole collection of society, and it requires legislation. Legislation is at the heart of all of the really powerful waste management tools that are out there. And corporations play a larger role a lot of times in the passage or blocking of legislation than individuals do. And all of the good ideas that haven't happened yet in Massachusetts have had corporate opponents. Corporations come in, they testify against these legislations. So corporations have an obligation to be good members of the community. They have an obligation to be good stewards of their products and packaging, and to be honest and not misleading. And we need more engagement of individuals to talk to corporations and say, these are our expectations for you. And we don't expect you to be standing in the way of us implementing this good legislation, because that's what's been happening so far.
Yeah, Janet, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that while I would never discourage anybody from examining their own lifestyle and making choices that fit with, their goals and values to preserve the planet, we need whole-scale retail governmental infrastructure change, and we need it right away. I mean, it seems like every week another study comes out showing that, it's, things are melting faster and the planet's warming at a more rapid pace. And, here if anybody is joining from Boston, that, it really seems like every week there's a storm where there's flooding. There's, last summer was the hottest on record. So it is an emergency. But again, I think a really important message is we know what to do. We have the policies at our fingertips. We have the research. We have the examples. We need to make it happen. As Susan said, we need to get our legislature to pass laws. We need our regulatory agencies like the DEP to move. We need corporations to be more responsible. Those are the wholesale, immediate actions that we need.
Tato, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, again, I couldn't agree more. That's what needs to be done in order to reduce the amount of waste that ends up regrettably in landfills, creating so much methane and other hazards to the environment. But also, we are wasting precious resources, extracting, using, throwing. That linear thing cannot continue, and it's a way of living that we need to change. So it's, as Janet was saying and Susan were saying, this is a systematic thing, and a lot of stakeholders have to be involved. Yet one thing I want to mention is that there are also advances in recycling methods, companies that are using more advanced systems to help extract whatever needs to be extracted. If there is an incentive to do that, because if there's no economics to recycling, then there's no recycling. And if people don't demand recycled materials or recycled products, then there's no market for those. So it has to be also, again, a systematic approach. But as individuals, if we demand corporations to use more recycled materials or to reuse more or to reduce the amount of materials that they are using in order to prepare anything or produce anything, that's where we come about as individuals. Of course, reducing our waste, etc. And yet again, innovation is part of this, and that is why we really think we're a great example. Probably there are other companies doing great things around of how innovation can complement all these efforts. Because at the end of the day, there will always be a waste of waste, residual waste, something that cannot be reduced or recycled, and needs to find some kind of solution. And that is where we're coming. So in a way, this UBQ innovation is in a way a leader, okay, in thinking different and helping the system to adapt itself faster, and being also an example for other companies to dare to try. People thought that you cannot use mixed household waste to create anything. Well, today we're doing these thermoplastic or plastic-like pellets made with a residual waste that is aimed to landfill, and these are going to Mercedes-Benz to create car parts. And this is in a way reusing waste. So McDonald's is doing trays and Pepsi is doing transportation pallets. So if corporations also accommodate to these changes and they demand alternative materials that are the result of recycling or conversion technologies like us, then we're creating a system. But these companies need really to be pushed there, and that is where individuals come. If you demand greener, carbon negative, recycled content, well, companies will adapt to you. So this is where our power also comes about as individuals.
I want to turn now to our questions from the audience. Thank you guys all so much. And thank you, audience members, for submitting. The first question I want to ask is from someone named Pam, and I will point it first to you, Susan. They want to know what it is that can contaminate recyclables and what happens to those recyclables once they get contaminated.
Thank you so much for the question. I'm smiling because that's a topic that we've spent so much time on here at the Container Recycling Institute. When I mentioned before that the best models that we see are not in the United States, they're coming from Canada and Europe. One of the things that they do differently, especially in Europe, is they don't mix materials together before trying to recycle them. We use a lot of single stream recycling in the United States and a little bit of dual stream recycling, but not as much source separation. And source separation, where you really keep the materials separate, you keep aluminum with aluminum, you keep glass with glass, like in the state's bottle bill program, those materials are kept separate. It's really important because obviously you can't make an aluminum can out of newspaper. You can't have those materials cross-contaminating each other. And once they all go into a truck and get smashed together, you can't unscramble that egg. And you can't unbreak glass. When you break glass, little tiny pieces are going to get lost forever. So in order to maximize what we get out of recycling, we have to put our best effort into recycling and keep the materials separate. The other thing that is special about beverage containers that go through container deposit laws is that, especially for plastics, all of that plastic is already food grade plastic, and it doesn't have any additives that aren't allowed to be put into food grade materials. So it's a different purity level, it's a different quality level that's acceptable for food processing. And because of that, those bottles are ideally suited to be made into beverage bottles again. So turning a like item into a like item also has really big advantages.
Amazing. The next question we had is from somebody named Cheryl, and Janet, I'll point this one to you because you were talking about, the idea that term zero waste once upon a time felt like a lofty dream. Cheryl wants to know, how realistic is a zero waste household, and how do we get there?
Well, a zero waste household depends on the large scale changes that we were talking about earlier. And again, it's so great to have, you know, all the participants. I'm sure they're interested in how their home and their lifestyle can reflect their care for the environment and for sustainability. And, you know, our day is made up of choices and decisions we make therein. That said, we're not going to have zero waste households until we have these policies and laws put in place and we get corporations to be accountable. I mean, just as an example, our national organization recently did a study. You know, Amazon says, oh, our materials are recyclable, you know, our packaging is recyclable. Well, we put trackers in, like, I don't know, 150 different packages around the country. We track them. Of course, most of them do not get recycled. So we need to hold Amazon accountable for providing packaging that's actually recyclable, and more important, to reduce. You know, if I order a new mouse for my computer, I don't need it coming in 16 layers of plastic and gigantic cardboard boxes. So I think a zero waste household relies on the laws and regulations and corporate accountability that we have been talking about for this whole panel.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have, I see in the chat, a UBQ specific question, so I'm going to address that to you, Tato. They want to know, you had mentioned the material being used to make car parts. They wanted to know what else it's used for and whether or not it will be possible to use it for things that touch food, like food-related packaging and food-related products.
Okay, so look, we are today, the material is being used by a number of industries, all of them in the durable products. We're not working with single-use plastics. We prefer to UBQ material to be used in durable products that tend to get back into the system in a recycled way. The material is highly recyclable, so we support that system. Construction, pipes, panels, roofing, flooring, logistics, pallets, boxes, bins. We did the recycled bin of the city of Richmond, Virginia, with UBQ material as a pilot for them to create a bin that is made from residual waste back into the houses of people to use it as a container for waste. We are using a UBQ for car parts, for furniture, flower pots. I mean, it's not we're selling the UBQ material to those companies that create those products. The beauty of UBQ is that because we're saving that residual landfill waste that tend to release those enormous amounts of methane, we are saving those emissions. So in a way, if you account for that, we're a very carbon negative material. And if you compare that material to the conventional plastic that we're replacing, like polypropylene, polyethylene, polyester, materials you probably have heard of, that are very intense in energy to be created, then we're saving the emissions of the landfill, and we're saving the enormous emissions of oil-based resins. But we're also saving the oil. And we're bringing back to the system, you know, a new material that can be recycled time and time again. So we're not using UBQ for food contact products at this stage. Eventually, we will try and go into that direction. Today, we're mostly using it or shipping it to customers that have control on the logistic chain to be able then to recover those. A tray of McDonald's, it breaks in the branch, they can return it back to the manufacturer to be recycled. A hanger of Mainetti breaks in Target, it can be brought back by Target to the recycler. So there is a system that we're trying to adapt into where things are, once you do UBQ, you can recycle it time and time again and keep it in the system, supporting a circular economy, which is the aim of every one of us.
We have here a lot of questions about packaging. So I'm going to pick one by someone named Melinda, and this one I will address again to you, Susan. She wants to know whether or not there are places that tax like packaging that is less sustainable, these like single-use plastics, things like that, and if it would be possible to in some way incentivize to incentivize sustainable packaging. Is that something that's being done anywhere that you know of? Is that something that could be done?
There are all sorts of, I guess I would lump all of this in together in different types of financial engineering, that ways of creating carrots and sticks, incentives and disincentives. We already talked about the bottle bill. That's an incentive. It's a very, very powerful incentive that gets people to return their bottles and cans or pick them up if they're littered. But also, you specifically asked about taxes on packaging, and one of the areas where there are taxes on packaging is again with bottles and cans. There's something called an environmental levy in the province of Ontario, Canada, on beer that is sold in one-way packaging. So there's a 10-cent fee on beer in cans because that's one-way packaging, and that 10-cent fee does not exist on the beer that is sold in refillable glass bottles. Similarly, there is the potential of a tax in Norway, and that was an either or for beverage producers. If they are part of the container deposit system, they don't have to pay the tax. And if the deposit system is performing at a certain level, if the deposit system isn't performing at that level, then the tax would come into place. So that currently nobody's having to pay the tax, but exists there as a disincentive or an incentive to do something else and really get those materials recycled. So there are probably many, many more ways like that could be invented to incentivize or disincentivize what we want to see happen with packaging.
Can I add one thing, Ivy?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I've had to train myself, years and years of working on recycling. The most sustainable packaging is no packaging. And so, when you go, you gotta like reorient yourself when you walk into the supermarket and you see a cucumber in shrink wrap plastic. I mean, I don't care if it's made of like we don't need to package so much of what we do. And I know for a long time, recycling was the goal in and of itself. I've had to retrain myself, and I always start with reduce now. And so I just wanted to add that to the extremely helpful list that Susan just offered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point about, sometimes, I shouldn't say sometimes, always pretty much no packaging is the best packaging. Susan, I just had a quick follow-up question related to some of the solutions that we see elsewhere in the world. Somebody, John, was wondering what that separated stream recycling looks like in Europe. He's wondering if, for example, does somebody go out into their backyard and they have their glass bin and their cardboard bin and their aluminum bin? Are those things at a centralized location where everybody dumps all their glass in one place? Could you talk just a little bit about what that looks like?
I can, because when I have had the fortune of being in Europe and when I have had the fortune of being in somebody's house, I always ask to look at their trash and recycling, and I take pictures of it. So they do have multiple bins in their houses where they store things. Like they use a lot of refillable beverage containers in Germany. And people have racks in their kitchen or their pantry area where they can store their crates that have the used bottles that they're getting ready to take back to the store. They have bins in their kitchens that are not just one or two bins, but multiple smaller bins to separate the packaging into its material types. And all throughout Europe, in many, many countries, they have separate glass collection that is usually even by color. So if you come across, if you're walking through the city, or especially if you're in a public area like a public square or a public park, you will almost always see recycling bins that are very separated by material type. This is where the paper goes, this is where glass goes, and they often have the different colors of glass. And the bins are so ubiquitous that most of the countries have a law that there has to be one set of glass bins for every 1,000 inhabitants. So that means neighborhood by neighborhood, there's a set of glass bins, so that if you have those materials in your house, you only have to walk a couple of blocks before you have a place to separate out your glass. And then the other packaging is separated with paper fibers like cereal boxes and newspaper, kept separately from packaging, lightweight packaging like aseptic containers or plastic containers.
Got it. That's super helpful. Thank you so much. I think we've got time for about 2 more questions. I will direct one of them from somebody named Jim to Janet. And this is, as I believe I mentioned at the beginning, I am assuming our audience are trending towards the more educated, more informed, more engaged end of the spectrum. But Jim is wondering, how can we get our neighbors, our parents, our children, or whoever to care? This is sort of less about a system level carrot and stick, but how do we increase awareness and increase education for just the people that are around us and in our own network?
Well, there's so many, I think that's a personal question. I know some people act on this through their, their faith community. Some people have neighborhood groups. Some people, at the workplace get together with like-minded people. But I think one thing that's really important, and I live in a neighborhood where people are extremely educated, but if I ask them, do you know who your state rep and your state senator are? They often don't know. And the reason that that's important is you need to not feel like you're just tilting it at windmills to mix up issue areas. You need to feel like when you express something, it is going towards somebody who can help make the decision. And so, I just had coffee this morning with a legislator who came from her office hours. And, people came to the office hour and they had, questions and opinions and ideas. And I think just to know, like, who is on the city council, or who is my rep, who is my senator, how can I have my voice heard by people who can actually make the decisions to change things? I think that's really important. And I think, my kids went through the public schools here, and, the civic education, how you connect with decision makers and what are the steps you can take as a citizen, not an expert in an issue area, just somebody who cares about the community. I think that's really lacking. And so one thing I would do is just, when you say educate, I think people should know, like, these are your city councilors. This is when town meeting is. This is your state rep and your state senator. And just show up. They're your, they're your officials. They're the ones that can make decisions to get more recycling and to get more reduce and to get composting started. So I think it's really important for people to feel like they're connected as citizens to those who can make the decisions in their communities.
Absolutely. All right, our last question here. I'm just going to sort of leave open. I'll have Tato start, but if anybody else wants to jump in, please feel free. And that is just from somebody who was, talking about a little bit about their climate worry, their climate grief, and was wondering, there may not be a silver bullet, but are there ways that we can speed up the transition to reducing our waste? Are there areas where we could be moving faster, where it might be, low-hanging fruit, so to speak, in terms of speeding up the pace that we're currently moving?
Yeah, I will take it because it's very important. Look, our big plant, the biggest plant of UBQ is now in the Netherlands. Okay, and the Netherlands, as Germany and Denmark, very advanced in recycling. As Susan said, they are, for the last 20 years, they've been separating everything. And yet there's always that residual, that mixed plastic that is contaminated with food or multi-layered, and the diapers and all the other stuff and the food residues that are sticking to the into the waste, into the bag, that will go regrettably to landfill or to incineration because there's no other solution. By the way, in Europe, landfilling is forbidden. Therefore, the fees that they are paying are double what the Massachusetts is paying to get rid of waste. And yet there is still a residual. So there we're converting waste from Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands into UBQ material, and that is called innovation. So in addition to all these policies that need to happen, because of the urgency of the matter, we need technologies that bridge the gap between us regulating, legislating, and changing to do things faster. And this is where we feel we come in. Again, always supporting the reduce, the reuse, and the recycle. We prefer a bottle to become a bottle or a packaging for food, just like Susan was saying, than ending up in the landfill. But if for any reason it's there, we can take it. So innovative technologies are here very important. Massachusetts is a leader in innovation with all your universities and startup ecosystem. That is why we feel also very comfortable in bringing an innovative technology that can bridge that gap of time. So you need also to think about innovative technologies that are good, that are clean, that adapt to the system, and that helps you get to the point you want faster. And UBQ is one of those.
Susan, do you want to jump in on this? And then Janet, I'll have you close us out.
I actually, since we only have a couple minutes left, I want to share some of the props that I brought. Because I have found that when people come to visit my house, they end up taking notes on this and actually do this at home. So this is what I use instead of paper towels. We haven't purchased paper towels in like 15 years. We don't use any disposable cleaning products in our house. And I used to use cut up t-shirts, but my husband found these lovely little squares and bought these for me. And we don't throw away paper towels. That's one of the ways that the trash in our house has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. We also don't use plastic wrap, but I do have food huggers, and I love these that fit around avocados. We also use containers. So it's just one, if you can find a category in your house where you can say, I'm not doing this category of waste anymore. I'm going to convert what I'm doing. If you can adopt one habit at a time, in our house, we like to do one major and one minor every year. So one of the years, our minor was to give up paper towels. And that was a really long time ago. I can't even remember how many years ago. And I found that just friends come over to visit our house, and then I hear from them later. I started doing that too. I got a basket, I got some little rags, and I don't use paper towels anymore.
Susan
so
is
wonderful.
starting the revolution.
No, truly. Thank you so much. And that's so helpful. I love that you brought the props. I'm going to go home and cut up t-shirts of my own. Janet, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, I think, you mentioned somebody referred to climate grief. One thing that gives me so much hope is I feel like every day I learn about some new, revolutionary institution that we're starting. Go on Free Cycle. There's a zillion people on there. Our Buy Nothing group in our neighborhood, it's now on its 4th category because there's so many people who want to be a part of it. You go to one of these Right to Repair Fix-It clinics, the line is out the door. There's so many examples of, people just rejecting that consumption and more and stuff is the way forward. And I feel like these, little groups of folks getting together in communities, around the country and finding these alternative ways, that is an antidote to the grief. And I think that, it shows that people are ready to do it differently, to reduce and to really create a planet that is sustainable. So I think that's a piece of joy we need to all hold on to.
Absolutely. That's so well said. Thank you so much. Thank you, all 3 of you guys. A huge virtual round of applause for all of our panelists. And thank you all audience members for your wonderful questions. I only wish we had another 45 minutes. But since we are at the end of our time, there will be a transcript available of this conversation, and it is also recorded. So please don't hesitate to reach out to our events team for anybody who might have joined us late. And thank you all again so much for coming. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivy.